on the YouTube page. It's always slow. I never know exactly when we're live, but I know we're going live. There we go. I think we're live now. Yes. Okay. All right. Here we go. Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen here with life coach Cindy Chavez. Today is Wednesday. It's June the 19th, 2019, and it is 4 p.m. in New York, 1 p.m. in Los Angeles, 9 p.m. in London, and 6 a.m. in Sydney, Australia. But wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining us for another episode of LOA Today, your daily dose of happy, and happy Neville Day, because we are talking about Neville Goddard, as we do every Wednesday. And Cindy, I always look forward to it like you do. I know you look forward to it. It's like a break in the week, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's always good. And I love Neville. And you know, it's funny. It's a little selfish, but it's an hour that I get to focus on Neville that I might not have done this week if I wasn't
true
for the podcast, right?
It's true. Yeah. I was thinking about something along that line. I was noticing recently that in Facebook, I mean, there are a lot of groups about Neville Goddard, about Abraham Hicks, just general law of attraction. There's all kinds of groups like that. And yet, as I think about it, very rarely do the Neville groups talk about Neville. Very rarely do the Abraham groups talk about Abraham. It's usually people coming on and asking for advice, and everybody else is giving them advice, And it made me think, there almost ought to be a Facebook group that actually talks about Neville, or actually talks about Abraham, or talks about The Secret, or talks about whatever, But that's one of the things I like about our show, because we actually talk about it in detail, in depth. We even get our decoder rings on. So
there's an idea that that environment trumps intention. And what that means is that, and it's funny because I've had this discussion with a friend of mine who always says that intention trumps everything. So it sounds like those ideas are at odds with each other. But what she's really saying is that if you have an intention, and your intention is strong enough and focused enough, then nothing else really matters. You will be able to get there, right? And so I agree with that. But the part about environment trumping intention is saying that even if you have an intention, if your environment doesn't support it, that it's not likely that it'll happen. So, for instance, if I make an intention to walk every day, and this week there's been, a hurricane or something, that's literally talking about environment, but that environment's going to trump that intention most likely, right? So if I have an intention that every week I'm going to spend at least an hour reading Neville, but then I crowd my schedule with so many other things that, and I don't have a good place to read or whatever, then that environment that I've created for myself is going to kind of trump that one intention. So when we can get them to work together, and that's what this is for me, it's like, of course I'm going to show up for the podcast. It's a wonderful environment. I've got you to talk to, and our listeners are there, and they contribute so much. And so I'm going to show up. So my environment is actually, supporting the intention to get this hour of Neville time. It works together.
By the way, Jeffrey posted something. He says, I'm part of a Neville group that is all about the discussion. I'll send you an invitation. I'm curious to see a group like that. That sounds pretty good.
Ask and you shall receive, right?
I guess. And boy, talk about quick law of attraction. I mean, that's fabulous. So thank you, Jeffrey. That's cool. That's really great.
Jeffrey might have been the one. Somebody said one time, somebody told us that whenever they got a compliment, that they would say, tell everyone, right? And that's one of my things that I like to coach people around is like, how many people know? When people tell me they're looking for their soulmate, or they're looking for a new job, or they're looking for, anything, I ask them, who knows? How many people know? Like in your circle, in your neighbors, your friends, your family, who knows? And sometimes people say, well, nobody really knows. And I say, but this is how the universe works, right? She works through other people. I mean, that's how we find things out, through connection. So see, when you throw it out there in a group this size and you say, I really wish there was a group that talked about this, see how fast it comes back?
It's true. Well, we've experienced the same thing with the audio play that Alex King and I are putting together.
I was just thinking of that same thing.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing because I mean, it started off as an idea, and I shared it with you and Alex and others, and Alex really jumped on board, so the two of us kind of teamed up on it. And we weren't really sure where it was going to go. We had kind of like some vague goals for it, or that kind of thing. But then we just kind of just started brainstorming, and it was just one thing that led to another. It was truly a law of attraction experience because, like Abraham says, you focus on something for like a minute or more, and you'll start to get more stuff like that, and you'll get more ideas, and you'll get more feedback, and you'll get all kinds of stuff coming through. And it takes a little time for everything to come through, but it does. It just keeps coming and coming and coming. And I mean, great example of it just today. The three of us, Alex, PJ, and I had a meeting to discuss. We were basically setting a line, like how far do we go into like R-rated territory, or do we at all? And we decided we're going to keep it pretty PG. But in the course of having that discussion, we also started brainstorming about future episodes and different kinds of issues we could address and so forth. And brainstorming just went almost crazy. I mean, there was so many ideas coming out. If we'd been actually recording it, we could have made an outline. That's how strong it was, And I mean, that came out of an idea that just occurred to me, a couple months ago, and I didn't know what to do with it. That's just one little example. And it's like that every single day, something new, some stream of ideas, different people contact. I actually got a contact today. Now, we haven't even posted this podcast yet, right? We haven't even created the first episode. We aren't even in rehearsals yet. We got our cast. That's the big news for the week. We have our cast. And I got a contact today from somebody who's creating a new service to provide advertising for story-based podcasts. I'm saying, you got to be kidding. That is unbelievable. How the heck did they find us? I mean, Alex just created the Instagram page yesterday. That's how new the social media outreach is. I just created the Twitter account 2 days ago. I mean, this is crazy.
That's fantastic. Well, it's going to go fast, and I think that's the message the universe is giving you is that buckle your seatbelt.
No kidding.
It's going to move. So.
Yeah. So,
do we have announcements today?
We do. Let's get those done, and then we can dive into Neville and Prayer, the Art of Believing, the last chapter. But of course, the main announcement is always the same one, which is if you're not yet a subscriber, what are you waiting for? We've got 5 good shows a week. Everyone's different. Everyone's on a different topic. Everyone's got different co-hosts, or I've got different co-hosts every time, and they're fun. And every one of them is designed to help you feel good and get into that high vibration space. So become a subscriber so you get all of them coming right to your smartphone, and it's so easy to do, or any kind of device that you're using. Just go to the homepage of our website, loatoday.net, and at the top of the page, you will see instructions for how to do it for your particular device. Click, 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 and you're done. And then all the all the episodes are coming right to your phone or your computer or whatever device you're using as soon as we publish them. And then, of course, as you're listening to them and you're liking them, share it with other people on social media so they can get their daily dose of happy, because that's what it's all about. Subscribe and share. And, oh, by the way, if you want to watch us as we're recording these, we do live stream while we're recording to YouTube. So you can also subscribe to us on YouTube, watch us there. And there's a little bell there you can click on to get notified whenever we're live there. So, subscribe and share there as well. And we really appreciate all the efforts that our loyal listeners have done. And I know they've done quite a bit to help spread the word. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
We're very grateful for all of the shares, and not just sharing and subscribing, but also the contact that you've reached out. Let us know what you think about our shows. And we got a beautiful letter last week that was about, and mentioned Neville Day. So of course,
that's right. Yes.
But it's really great. There's this idea that you hear about in marketing and sales, but that it's kind of gross because they call it like the cockroach effect. So what they do is for every cockroach that you see running out in the middle of the kitchen floor, there are like 500 more that don't come out.
This isn't exactly an encouraging thought, but go ahead.
But the idea is that for every email you get, for every word of encouragement that you get, that someone reaches out, or complaint, but we don't get those. Like, we get a lot of really nice words of encouragement. So for every one person that will actually write an email and say, thank you for your show, this is what it's done for me, that there are a bunch of other people who feel the same way and they just haven't sent an email. So it's always wonderful to get them. And if you're one of those people that, had an idea but just hasn't sent the email, go ahead and send one.
And we assure you, we do not think of you as cockroaches. Just
Oh,
want to make that
absolutely
clear.
not. That's why I said it's kind of gross. I've heard it called like that so many times in different, areas, and they'll talk about this and they say, well, they call it the cockroach effect. I think, can't we think of a better name for
There's
this?
got to be one, right?
Oh,
I mean, what else is prolific? How about the rabbit? Rabbits are prolific, the rabbit effect.
yes, rabbits are so much cuter and so much better. All right. So we've been working our way through Neville Goddard's book, Prayer, The Art of Believing. And we almost finished it up last week, but we had one little chapter left. And so we're going to cover that today. And then if we have time, I never know what's going to happen. So if we have time, we can move into a very short Neville Goddard book. But we'll start here at chapter 7, Prayer, the Art of Believing. And the chapter title is called The Greatest Prayer.
Mm.
So Neville starts with probably, in my mind, would be one of his favorite words, imagination.
Yes, right.
He says imagination is the beginning of creation. I think that's really important for all of us to remember.
Yes.
You were talking a second ago that you had this idea and that you told a few of us about it. And then you and Alex and then PJ, started brainstorming about it. And look what you've created. And it all started with that, just an idea. So imagination is the beginning of creation.
No doubt.
You imagine what you desire, and then you believe it to be true. Every dream could be realized by those self-disciplined enough to believe it. People are what you choose to make them. A man is according to the manner in which you look at him. You must look at him with different eyes before he will objectively change. And I love this next quote. 2 men looked from prison bars. One saw the mud and the other saw the stars. Centuries ago, Isaiah asked the question, who is blind but my servant, or deaf as my messenger that I sent? Who is blind as he that is perfect, as blind as the Lord's servant? The perfect man judges not after appearances, but judges righteously. He sees others as he desires them to be. He hears only what he wants to hear. He sees only good in others. In him is no condemnation, for he transforms the world with his seeing and hearing. The king that sitteth on the throne scattereth evil with his eye. Sympathy for living things, agreement with human limitations, is not in the consciousness of the king, because he's learned to separate their false concepts from their true being. To him, poverty is but the sleep of wealth. I really like this because it plays right into my own ideas that connect with Hermeticism or Hermetic principles, right? Of the 2 sides of one coin, of the 2 ends of the same stick,
right?
Everything containing its opposite.
Mm-hmm.
So I love this. Poverty is but the sleep of wealth. He does not see caterpillars, but painted butterflies to be. Not winter, but summer sleeping. Not man in want, but Jesus sleeping. Jesus of Nazareth, who scattered the evil with his eyes, asleep in the imagination of every man, and out of his imagination must man awaken him by subjectively affirming, I am Jesus. Then and only then will he see Jesus, for man can only see what is awake in himself. The holy womb is man's imagination. The holy child is that conception of himself, which fits Isaiah's definition of perfection. Heed the words of St. Augustine. Too late have I loved thee, for behold, thou wert within, and it was without that I did seek thee. It is your own consciousness that you must turn as the only reality. There, and there alone, you awaken that which is asleep. Though Christ 1,000 times in Bethlehem be born, if he is not born in thee, thy soul is still forlorn.
I want to note something here. I don't remember if we've ever noticed anything like this before, but I'm noticing it for this particular case. I believe this is the first time that I can consciously remember that Neville took a metaphor and applied it in a different way from the way he had previously applied it.
Okay, tell me.
Well, previously, Jesus was one of the many metaphors for consciousness.
Yes.
Now, Jesus is it's hard to say exactly what he is in this, but he's asleep in the imagination of every man. So unless we buy the idea that consciousness is asleep in every man, he's meaning something a little different here. And I'm having a little trouble pinning down exactly what that is. So I was curious to know, what your take is on what exactly is he saying.
My take is that when he talks about Jesus, or when he talks about the Christ, and he uses both of those here, and I think he uses them as a parallel to each other, that he is talking about not just consciousness, but awakened consciousness. Neville's book, Awakened Imagination, where he talks about, in other words, we all have imagination, but it's sort of like saying all of us are creators. It's like we say to people say, well, the law of attraction doesn't work for me. And we go, well, it's working all the time for everyone.
Right.
Like, we're always creating everything, but we just don't all do it consciously. When he talks about Jesus and Christ, even in this metaphor, I think he's talking about us consciously using our imagination to be creative. And I say that because he says Jesus of Nazareth is asleep in the imagination of every man. And in other words, the ability to do the miracles that Jesus did, the ability to create. He says Jesus scattered the evil with his eye. That all of that ability might be laying dormant in the same way that he talks about poverty is the sleep of wealth. But it's when we become conscious and aware of it and learn how to tap into it, then we awaken our imagination. And if you notice, he uses these, he says, heed the words of St. Augustine, too late have I loved thee, for behold, thou wert within, and it was without that I did seek. So many times we're looking outside of ourselves for the how, or for the means, or for the source, instead of recognizing that our consciousness is the source and it is within us. And I think that's what he's talking about here.
So go back to the quote that started off this section. The king that sitteth on the throne scattereth the evil with his eye. What is the evil that is being scattered?
Well, that's a good question, because that would be subjective, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah.
Yeah.
And everything's metaphorical with him, so we know that it's a metaphor, but wonder what it's a metaphor for. I'm wondering if it's a metaphor for human limitation.
The evil? Did you say for human limitation?
That's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering if that's what the correlation is.
I think that's why he says in the next sentence, sympathy for living things, agreement with human limitations. In other words, and we've kind of touched on this through this whole book, right? But like when we feel sorry for someone, you and I talked one day off the air about the idea that so many times when we might think we're praying for someone, that we're actually worrying for them.
Oh, right. Yes, I remember that.
And the difference between prayer and worry is the energy that's in those thoughts and the things that we're picturing. So sympathy for living things and agreement with human limitations. Like when I think of someone I love that's maybe struggling, and if I fall into their story that nothing's working out for them and that they're so limited, and even with my best intentions of love and compassion, if my thought process is going on and on about, oh, poor them, I'm really not doing them any good.
Not really, no. You're doing a nice job of worrying, but
I heard someone say once, worrying is like praying for what you don't want.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily think about it that way, but when you add it all up, I mean, what does worry feel like? Does it feel good? Most people wouldn't say it feels terribly good. They would say it feels, pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Well, that's our clue right there. That's the clue that it really isn't helping anybody, because you're putting out a feeling that doesn't feel good to you.
Right. And I mean, I come from a long line of champion worriers.
Oh, I don't know. I think my mom could give you a run for your money, I would think.
But you see where Neville says creation is finished, you call your creation into being by feeling the reality of the state you would call. That's not worry.
No.
I mean, when I'm worrying about someone or I'm worrying about myself, what is the state I'm calling in? Probably more things to worry about.
Yeah, I would think. Yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot of room for anything else, really.
And I certainly don't want to do that for myself. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to worry and call in more things I have to worry about, but I especially don't want to do that for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that just horrifies me to think that in my care and compassion and worrying over someone, I would actually be bringing them more things to worry about. I don't want to do
Sure.
that.
Yeah, quite doable, but you're right. You don't really want to go there.
No.
And
So
here we are. We're also dealing with the topic that we have addressed, that he has addressed in other books. I don't remember exactly where, but creation is finished.
yes.
And I will voice this is one of the very few things that I give him a little bit of a hard time about, because of the nature of infinity.
Yes.
And because infinity is infinite, you never actually get to the end of the list. So saying that it's finished when it's infinite strikes me as being a little bit of a contradiction.
Well, then we can talk about time not being linear and everything happening all at once.
Yeah.
The idea of parallel universes where every possibility has already happened. And if that's the case, one time someone asked us, well, if creation is finished, why do we say we're creating? And my answer was, well, I think actually then we're just choosing.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it feels like creation because we are having an experience that we didn't have before and we chose it. So
Yeah.
that feels like I created it.
I think it's a little bit problematic. I understand why he's saying it, but I think it's a little bit problematic. And my response is creation's never finished. Creation goes on, and that's not a weakness. That's actually a strength, because that's what's so cool about the fact that we not only that we keep going, that we're infinite beings, that we don't die and then life is done and we're all over and we never exist ever again. And we continue, and we're part of a continuum of source energy, and that continues and continues and continues. To me, that is not just a great argument for creation being unfinished and continuing, but wow, that's why it's so cool to continue, because we're just creating and creating and creating and creating and creating.
Yeah, and I think that I think I understand what he's saying, especially because remember he's using all of these verses from the Christian Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going back to like God saying it is finished, creation is finished, whatever. But I still think that I think that the thing that seems to be contradictory may be only because of our perception, which is so limited.
Mm-hmm. It could be.
As humans, because we really, like, I say it all the time and I still can't completely fathom it, that time isn't linear, because I see everything as having a before and an after.
Mm-hmm.
But science keeps saying to us, no, we keep proving that time is not linear. Everything has happened all at once, which is kind of mind-blowing. So I'm not sure, but I do perceive that creation continues and that we continue to create. And like you said, that things are infinite and continue to unfold and unfold and unfold. So that is cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that terribly important a point. I just noted because it's one of the very few times where I've actually taken Neville, to task. Like, I'm not sure I agree with that, because I agree with everything else.
But it's totally fine. Like, I was doing an interview with someone, and before the interview, they said to me, we were discussing kind of the outline, and when we got to one part, they said, no, now I think that we're going to disagree on this. And I said, great, right? Like,
yeah,
life is full of potentials and possibilities, and I think it's wonderful to have different ideas and to be able to entertain different ideas. So it's like, no, I think it's a good thing that I actually don't want to find myself in a place where I agree with 100% of everything someone says.
right.
Like I agree with everything Neville says. That's almost scary to me.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this sweet spot where I find a teacher or an author and I'm really just nodding my head and really getting into it because I'm just agreeing with everything they're saying, and that's really sweet. Hopefully, though, there comes a few ideas that I go, I don't know, because I don't want to be in that place where
I agree with you. Yeah, I think you're right.
To me, that pushes over into that fundamentalist place, right?
Yes.
Where all of a sudden someone can say nothing wrong, and it's like, to me, I'd rather be able to disagree with a few things.
Sure, I agree that we should disagree. In fact, isn't that what the Abraham message is about contrast? Isn't that what the purpose of contrast is? To create different ideas and to have different experiences that where we aren't in agreement all the time. I think it was on Tuesday, Alex and Bill G and I had a conversation that included discussing the concept of twin flames and what was the difference between twin flames and soulmates and so forth. And so I was learning it from the perspective of the one he learned from Robert Detzler, who is one of the founders of SRT. And in the way he explained it, I could understand what his definitions were. They kind of made sense. And in his definition, the twin flames were two souls who were together near the very beginning of creation. So if you kind of work up the hierarchy to where the original Godhead was, the twin flames were like right near the top of that hierarchy when they were right next to each other. And because of that, they are very, very similar. And so that becomes the big desire. Oh, wow, it's such a powerful relationship when you're having a relationship with a twin flame and so on and so forth. And that's all fine and good. There's nothing wrong with that. But by the same token, the whole Godhead idea came about in order to create different ideas, right, and to create different beings and different ways of living and so forth. So even if you buy into the Detzler approach, well, what's wrong with being with people and further out on the I don't know what to call it, the explosion, the spreading of source energy. Why not be out on that end too? What's wrong with that? Because that's where the most contrast is. And indeed, that's why we come into this world, I think. I'm now convinced that we come here to experience the contrast.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it's a wonderful thing to have different ideas and to be able to entertain possibilities. You've heard me say that before. I have a tendency, the older I get, to not say I believe this and that, but to say I like to entertain the possibility of that, or I like the idea. You mentioned twin flames. There's the whole notion of twin flames comes out of a part of Plato's Symposium, narrated by Aristophanes, and he was a comedian that was famous for his plays that involved people having sex with donkeys. Right? So in the
not something I read a lot of, I have to admit, but
well, so in the original context, that whole idea of twin flames was kind of a crude joke.
Yeah.
And yet over time, what happens? Ideas evolve, and people, there's the whole allocation of meaning, right? We allocate meaning to certain things, and it means that to us. And so I think it's important to recognize, even with Neville, like we've talked about Neville, that these things that Neville has written were decades and decades ago. And it's amazing to me that some of the things that Neville talks about, the science part.
Oh, yeah.
We hadn't proven scientifically yet, and Neville may explain them in kind of a crude way, simplistic way, but then we go, wow, this is just coming into, reality now with science proving this out. So Neville had a lot of things to say that were kind of mind-blowing, and yet we still have to recognize that when he said all this stuff, 50, 70 years ago, things are going to change. Thoughts evolve, ideas evolve.
And that's actually a good thing. It's a very good thing, because I'm thinking back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, the play that Alex and I are working on. It started off as this very vague, nebulous thought. It was, in a sense, it was crudely stated. You just said that Neville kind of crudely stated some stuff. Well, the way we first expressed the play was kind of crudely stated. Literally, the way it got started was I read an article that said that somebody had sold a bunch of these fictional podcasts for $230 million. And I went and played a couple of them. I didn't like them. I said, well, shoot, I can write a bad play too. That's where it all started.
I love it so much. I love it because I remember the day you told me that. You were like,
right.
I went and listened. I didn't think they were that great. Like, we can do this. This is not. So you see, but there was an openness to entertain the podcast.
That's right.
Well, and that's what I think is important. So
yeah, I agree with you.
everything Neville says or not, it's worth listening to and entertaining and seeing what we think about the idea. All right, so we're about halfway through the chapter.
Okay. And halfway through the show. How appropriate, right?
All right. So Neville says a mood attracts its affinities. Now, this is going to be really interesting. I want to hear your thoughts on it, because he says a mood attracts its affinities, but it does not create what it attracts. So we've got a difference here. Neville's making a differentiation between attraction and creation. He's saying our mood attracts its affinities, but it does not create what it attracts. As sleep is called by feeling, I am sleepy, so too is Jesus Christ called by the feeling, I am Jesus Christ. Man sees only himself. Nothing befalls man that is not the nature of himself. People emerge out of the mask, betraying their close affinity to your moods as they are engendered. You meet them seemingly by accident, but find they are intimates of your moods. Because your moods continually externalize themselves, you could prophesy from your moods that you, without search, would soon meet certain characters and encounter certain conditions. Therefore, the perfect one into being by living in the feeling, I am Christ. For Christ is the one concept of self, in which can be seen the unveiled realities of eternity. So, to simplify this a little bit, Neville is just pointing out that we attract the energy that we're putting out. He's calling it a mood. And I think that this is really clear, that he says, because your moods continually externalize themselves, you could prophesy from your moods who you would meet next. So if we are a person that is angry all the time or sad all the time, we'll begin to meet other people that are having the same experiences that we are, at least emotionally. And that's very true. If you've ever stood in a grocery line and heard somebody start complaining about the weather, about the grocery line moving too slow, about the price of gas, whatever, people will start chiming in. And I've had that happen several times where I've been the quiet one because I didn't really want to chime in, but I thought, oh my gosh, all these people are really, really ready to hop on the bandwagon.
Yeah, that's true. Right? That happens a lot too.
Yeah.
That one sentence, I think you're right, is very worth pointing out. A mood attracts its affinities, but it does not create what it attracts. And I think the word mood is very specifically chosen by Neville. The reason I say that is the next sentence says, asleep is called by feeling, I am sleepy, so too is Jesus Christ called by the feeling, I am Jesus Christ. What Neville's doing here, and I've seen this in a lot of Neville followers, they make the same differentiation. They differentiate between thought and feeling, and they say that they are separate. So that's why they use the word mood. The idea is you can have a mood without having any thoughts going on. Okay. And by the way, you and I understand law of attraction is the combination of thought and feeling that is what does the creating. My own view is a little bit more along the lines of what Abraham teaches. And the way I would express it is, if you hold a mood long enough, or if you hold a thought long enough, you will get a corresponding thought to go with the mood, or a corresponding mood to go with a thought. They don't stay separate.
Generally speaking, our thoughts create our moods or feelings. So in other words, we have a circumstance, and that circumstance produces a thought, story we're telling about it. And that thought, that story we're telling, creates a feeling. That feeling then goes on to produce sometimes an action that we take, and that action produces a result. So there is a flow to how that works. And generally speaking, when we're feeling angry, we're feeling sad, we're feeling happy, it's because of some story that we've got going on, or a thought. It's because of a thought. It's because what we just talked about the allocation of meaning. We give meaning to certain things, right? And sometimes, and you and I have had this discussion before, sometimes we miss the mark so bad.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like someone seems short with us, And then we go off thinking in our head that person's angry with us, they don't like us, they think we're blah, blah, blah. And we create this whole big story. And then we find out later because they say, oh, sorry if I was short with you today. I had this terrible thing happen to me this morning and it wasn't you. And oh.
Yeah, right. Oops.
Off with a big story in our head that produced what? It produced a feeling. Oh, I feel so confused, or I feel sad, or I feel whatever, that this person, doesn't like me anymore, or whatever it is, when none of it was even true. So I think I'm trying to think of a situation where the feeling would come first, but I don't really see that happening.
Well, it's almost a chicken or egg question, because I can lay out a scenario in which the mood comes first, but I could also conceive how there was a thought before that, even though we kind of drew the line of where the mood started. And similarly, I could draw out a scenario where, well, the thought came first, but there was also a mood before it. They're continuous. It's not like any of us way back and say, there's where the original one happened. It was that one right there. There's a continuity to it. And I think there's a good reason for it. The reason, in my mind anyway, is feeling. We often describe that as being the power behind the thought. Yes. It's the energy. It's the energy energizing, doing its energetic thing. And the thought is more like the focusing part of it. So you have focusing energy. Okay, well, that's going to do certain things. Regardless of whether you start by thinking by noticing the energy first, or you start by noticing the focusing first, one way or another, you're going to get to this synergy of the two working together.
And I really think it's our stories that create our experience.
Yeah, sure.
And I say that for a specific reason, and that is, Neville says our consciousness is what's creating, right? In other words, I like that he says your mood attracts its affinities, but it doesn't create. Right? It's not my sadness or my happiness that's creating something. It's my imagination, my subconscious, my consciousness. I'm consciously creating. It's my thoughts. It's my story. Why do I say story instead of thoughts? Because yes, I will say I agree with the idea that thoughts create things. But we have plenty of thoughts that kind of fly over our head, right? Like when you had the experience of hearing those story podcasts, fictional podcasts that tell a story.
Right.
If you never would have thought about it again after that day, and you just went on and didn't have a thought about it, and we do this a lot, right? Plenty of times we hear about something and never think about it again.
Exactly.
I believe that you would have found yourself creating this thing. I don't, but it became a story that you were telling.
That's right.
First story was, I can do this, right? And then you started brainstorming, and then it became a bigger story of, hey, we're going to do this. And I think that's why I like to say that our stories, because they're thoughts that we tell over and over again. And they're often also thoughts that we think so much that they become words, not just stories in our head, but stories we start telling other people, stories we talk about all the time. That's when they're starting to get some momentum and becoming creative.
I like that, and I like it for a number of reasons, not the least of which because that description you just gave works perfectly well if you take out the word story and put in the word belief. Belief also builds the same way. A belief is a series of thoughts that you think over and over again. Yeah. Truly, a story and a belief are the same thing. It's just two different ways of looking at the exact same thing.
And I think that if I look at the top of this chapter, that Neville says this right off of the bat. And now I'm looking for it, but he talks about belief, and I think it was this chapter. And so I think it's important that we recognize that we can do this consciously.
That's right.
It doesn't just kind of sort of happen to us. I mean, if we want to be conscious about it, we can tell a better story and keep telling it.
Or we could tell a worse story and keep telling that.
We don't want to do that, though.
No, we don't, but we could. We often do.
We often do. But that's the conscious part of conscious creation.
Right.
Yes. Is choosing those ideas consciously. So
choices and preferences.
Neville goes on to say, our behavior is influenced by our subconscious assumption respecting our own social and intellectual rank and that of the one we are addressing. Let us seek for and evoke greatest rank, And the noblest of all is that which disrobes man of his morality and clothes him with uncurbed immortal glory.
That's quite a phrase.
I like that he says uncurbed. I think that's really humorous for some reason.
Yeah. It's nice to know he has a sense of humor.
I don't know if that was humor or not, or maybe just for the time.
I think so. I think it was lighthearted. Let's put it that way. It may not have been intended to make you laugh, ha ha, but I think it was deliberately lighthearted. Yeah.
He says, let us assume the feeling. And he talked about this a minute ago. He says about the mood, right? The mood, he said, the feeling I am sleepy, so too is Jesus Christ called by the feeling I am Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Here, let us assume the feeling I am Christ, and our whole behavior will subtly and unconsciously change in accordance with the assumption. So I want to talk about that for a minute, because I think about Neville saying, this is you. You are the one that creates your reality. You are Christ. I am. He talks about that affirmation. And so many times when we talk about affirmations, people will say they have a hard time with certain affirmations because they don't feel like the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we talk about this a lot. Like,
right.
Well, I look in the mirror and I say, I have a happy, slender body, but I don't feel slender. Or I look at my bank account and I'm trying to say I am wealthy and abundant, but I don't feel wealthy and abundant because I have all these bills that need to be paid and I don't know where the money's coming from, on and on. So these I am kind of statements, which sometimes I try to help people out by tweaking a little bit by saying, I'm in the process of becoming abundant. I'm in the process, or I'm learning to be abundant. But what do you make of this with Neville telling us, assume the feeling, I am Christ? That seems like it might be a jump for some of us.
Well, it is. But by the same token, when we look at our Neville decoder ring, we recognize that Christ is the equivalent of consciousness. So do a word substitution. Therefore, let us assume the feeling, I am conscious, or I am consciousness, until our conscious claims becomes our subconscious assumption. Now, all of a sudden, it makes a whole lot easier sense for us here in the 21st century.
Yes, but I still want to go back to the feeling of it.
Okay.
He's not saying, because Neville's big thing is to assume the feeling.
Yeah.
Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. We've gone over this and over this, and I love it. When he says, let us assume the feeling, I am Christ. I don't know that I've heard him say this before. I've heard a lot of recognizing I am.
True.
Recognizing I am Christ. Recognizing I have the power of my imagination. Recognizing my imagination creates everything. But now we're getting to, and assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. We've talked about assuming that the thing we want has already come to pass. How will that feel? But now we're getting into, let us assume the feeling, I am Christ. And I'm kind of scratching my head. I'm going, well, what does that feel like?
Oh, well, let me tell you what I think that is.
Yeah.
Breaking it down, Christ equals consciousness. I am is the initial statement. He made a big deal about that, particularly in Feeling is the Secret, I think it was.
Yes.
And that this is where all creation begins. It begins with the idea I am.
Right.
So I am Christ. I am consciousness. He's talking about the very initial stage of creating. Okay. And so now what is the feeling that's associated with that? Well, to me, it's the feeling of being alive.
I was just going to say freedom.
Yeah. Okay. I can go with that. It's like, wow, I am. And I feel that I am. I know what I feel like. I mean, I may have a hard time putting that into other words, but I know what I feel like. And I imagine you very much know what you feel like, and all of our listeners know what they feel like, because we know what it's like to be conscious. We experience consciousness. We do it every single day. We may not use the conscious faculty we have as often as we could, but we know what it feels like, and it feels pretty darn good.
Well, I think it just hit me when you were talking. I thought, oh wait, and I had the sense of what freedom feels like. That if I can assume the feeling I am Christ, and what he said before, uncurbed immortal glory.
Yeah, that's right.
I will recognize that I'm not limited.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where the word freedom popped into my head, because
Sure.
that unlimited potential, that potential to create whatever I want, that has to be part of the feeling of I am Christ.
It's the same feeling that occurs anytime that we are about to try some new activity for the first time, or we're creating an audio play, and it's not, we're creating it out of thin air. Like, let's create an audio play and we'll just make it about such and such, you know. At that very beginning, there's a feeling of anticipation and hopefulness and doubt and concern and excitement. And it's all kind of, it's like this great big ball of feelings and energies. And some of them can seem even contradictory, but it's just this feeling, this gigantic feeling that keeps growing the more that you focus on it. And that's what I think he's describing, that there is a definite feeling associated with an idea as it takes shape.
Well, I've often likened that to the feeling we get when we're brainstorming.
Mm-hmm.
It is, everything is still in the metaphysical realm, right? It's that realm of thoughts and ideas, hopes, dreams, wishes. There's no physicality to it yet. There's no weight to it yet. So it's very light.
Yes.
And it's a feeling that's very free because it's so light, and all these ideas start, bubbling up, and it's wonderful. People get excited in brainstorming sessions because it feels like the sky's the limit. And part of that is because it's still very light.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing weighing it down.
Right.
Now, when we start to bring it into reality, and the computer crashes and the person doesn't call us back, or, physical reality, then that's kind of what, there's an author, Maria Nemeth, she referred to that as trouble at the border, right? It's like the border between the metaphysical and the physical. Sometimes that's where things start taking on weight and they get heavier. But I think if we can follow what Neville's saying and keep the feeling in that place we talked about, that you're talking about, the beginning of things, that light, metaphysical, airy, dreamy, happy, hopeful, wishing place, if we can keep the feeling there and assume that feeling, even as we're moving the thing into the physical,
mm-hmm.
then we will have a whole lot of power there to create what we want.
No doubt. I agree completely. Yeah. And in fact, I would say if you wanted to put the idea of deliberate creation or conscious creation in a particular place in the sequence of things, that's it right there. That's the cusp of it right there, where everything's possible. Right. That is where deliberate creation happens, when you're doing it deliberately. That's where it all happens.
Well, and that's that place where we want to check our alignment.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this before, how many times we barge right into creating something without that. And then down the road, we're like, oh, this is getting hard. I think
yeah, right.
my alignment. It's like you check alignment first. We got to check it in the beginning.
Jeffrey raised a couple interesting questions here, and I want to bring them up before we move on, because we're finishing this book here. He says, if we can assume that feeling of Christ, can we also manifest the gifts that he had?
Yeah.
Or can we create our gifts, therefore creating something that isn't Christ, but with Christ-like powers?
I mean, I think so. I think that is why we have the stories about the miracles, because that's where they came from. They came out of consciousness. And, if you are a Christian, or if you're someone who just can entertain the reality of what the Christian Bible says, what is it recorded that Jesus said? You will do even greater works than I have done.
Yeah.
If you believe, like if you have this level of consciousness. So in the energy work that I do, explaining the levels of energy, there are 7 levels of energy. That bottom level is victim energy. That's when you're in that place where you feel like everything sucks, nothing's working out, this is terrible, it's never going to go right. And we've all been there, believe me.
Oh, yes.
I've been there. I'm raising my hand. We've all been there. But the levels move up and up. And once we get past the level 3, which is responsibility, that's where we're like, okay, I'm going to take responsibility for my experience. We may still have bad experiences that don't feel good, but we're in the space of not blaming everyone else and not feeling poor me, right? We're kind of moving up the ladder. But at the very top of the ladder, which is level 7 energy, which we don't experience very often, usually, I always call that Jesus energy, because if we could resonate in that level energy for any length of time, we could walk on water. We could turn water into wine. We could heal people. And when we do have experiences where we see miraculous healings and when we see miracles happen, we are experiencing that level of energy. And there's no limitation on that level of energy. There's no weight. There's no heaviness like we feel when we're, think how heavy it is when you're at that bottom place, when you've hit the bottom and you're nothing's ever going to be right again. It's
right.
Heavy, right? And so, yeah, I think, Jeffrey, you hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. If we can, and I don't think we have to be a Christian or believe, making air quotes, in Jesus or, you know, any of that to experience that level of energy. It's just a level of consciousness. And I believe that, you know, the teachers will say, Jesus was operating in that level of consciousness. And so were many other, you know, masters and rabbis and teachers and healers. And so are people today. We experience it today.
As you were talking there, it made me think about something I was reading, and you see this kind of thing, a lot of people posting about this, complaining that law of attraction doesn't work or it doesn't work for them or something along that line. And inevitably, the first thought that goes to my mind is they're thinking about this stuff in terms of what I call the magic wand. They're thinking about it in terms of some amazing, miraculous thing that nobody could possibly explain that just kind of appears. It just kind of, you know, appears out of thin air and so and that sort of thing, which sounds really nice, except that it ignores a whole bunch of manifestation. Because most manifestation is much more obvious than that. It's, I mean, literally, you look at everything that's in your life, you manifested all of it. That to me, that's much more magical than trying to just make something out of thin air. I mean, yeah, that would be cool, you know, sleight of hand or whatever. But when I think about everything around me having been manifested by me in some way, it blows my mind.
Yeah.
That's far more miraculous than creating something out of thin air from my perspective. But from the perspective of someone learning this stuff for the first time, they think about that thing, you know, appearing out of thin air.
Right. I remember the day that I had that sort of aha moment of that I didn't just manifest, you know, consciously the things I set out to manifest. And yes, they came to pass, but I manifested everything in my experience, even the really crappy stuff.
Yeah. And what was I thinking?
and then I came to the place where I thought, oh my goodness, like if I manifested all of this stuff I don't like, I can manifest a bunch of stuff I do like.
Yes.
And it was like,
that's it.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. It was like the Holy Grail.
And that's the other part of it. The people who get worked up about, well, this stuff doesn't work for me, and they're looking for the magic stuff out of thin air, and they're skipping the rest of the manifestation. They also are the ones who will most often, and I'm drawing kind of a broad brush here, so it's a little bit stereotypical what I'm saying, but there is this similar tendency to kind of assume that if it doesn't appear quickly and it doesn't appear the way I want it to, it doesn't work. And by the same token, when it does work, it's accidental. Mm-hmm. And if it's something that I didn't want, well, now you're blaming me for it. Right. And if it's something that I don't like so much, then, well, that's not my responsibility. It just turns into this great big snowball of, I don't want to be the creator.
So if you see where that energy is, it's still at the bottom.
Yeah.
It's that very, very low level of energy being experienced where things just aren't working right. And we create that for some reason, right? I mean, or for some purpose that we use later. I mean, everything works together, but definitely, yes, is that we're still creating our experience. The day that we step up and take responsibility, which I call radical responsibility, it's not that I'm responsible for someone's bad behavior. Mm-hmm. It's not that if someone assaults me, that it's my fault or that I'm responsible. But how I respond to it is my responsibility.
Yes.
What I do with it is my responsibility. You know, I live in Louisiana, and in 2016, we had a huge flood, and we've had many hurricanes. And, you know, there's no way that I would say, oh, this entire little town near me flooded, everyone lost their home. Is it all their fault? No. But they choose what they do with it and how they respond to it. And everyone has different responses. So that's the place of radical responsibility, of just understanding, okay, I get to choose how I feel about this happening. I get to choose what I do next and what I do with it. So we're actually almost finished with this chapter, which wraps up the book. So I want to go ahead and read this last.
Before, I know you want to read it, and I do want you to read it. I want to finish up one last thought here, because it's where I was going with all of that. And I like what you just said. Whenever I experience or encounter somebody who's on one of those threads, don't blame me, I don't like this, this is not working out the way I want, I'm not getting what I want, all this kind of stuff. The thought that keeps going through my head is, you're looking at all the reasons why you don't want this, you don't want to take responsibility for this, because you are determined that you're going to be powerless. Wouldn't it be so cool if you could just turn it around in your mind and say what you said and realize, whoa, the fact that I create all this stuff means I can actually create stuff that I want. Right. I can actually create stuff that I'd like. Yeah. Well, that's the leap. And that's the leap that tripped people up. It trips people up a lot, but it's not that big of a leap. It's just simply recognizing, if I created the stuff I didn't like, I can create the stuff that I did like. And I don't have to worry about the fact that I created stuff I didn't like. It's not that big of a deal. The big deal is, whoa, look at all this stuff I can create that I do like.
So a thing that helps is when you're dealing with someone that is in that place. And like I said, we've all been in that place.
Yeah, yeah.
It really helps sometimes to validate the way someone is feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I see you do this a lot, Walt. Say, I know this is really hard for you. I know you're feeling really sad about this. I know
sure.
You wanted, right? To recognize that those human emotions are common to all of us, you know, and then try to pivot to what we do want.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we talked about this many times too, is that pivot. It has to happen over and over and over. And sometimes I wonder if it's ever going to become natural or habit, because it's just that pivot. But when we're down in that place of experiencing that low energy, a nice thing to remember is that, you know, nothing lasts forever. And generally speaking, eventually we will come out of it. You know?
You do.
When I help someone come out of it, just show them a lot of love and understanding, and recognize, you know, get them to talk about what they do want.
And for ourselves, I like to remind myself, I am getting better and better at it. I am doing less and less of focusing on what I don't want. I am doing more and more focusing what I do want. Exactly. And it feels good. And I feel the progress. And how cool is that? Did it take me a while before I could feel that? Absolutely it did. It took me years before I could feel that. But I finally got there. And it starts to get cool after a while. It starts to get like, yeah, this is great stuff.
Yeah. All right, let's see if we can get through this paragraph so we can say we've wrapped up this book.
That's right.
All right. Our subconscious assumptions continually externalize themselves that others may consciously see us as we subconsciously see ourselves, and tell us by their actions what we have subconsciously assumed of ourselves to be. I find this to be really true. Sometimes it's a lot easier for us to see what's going on with someone than for them to see it. And so much easier for someone to just know where I'm at, because I have a tendency to not pay attention sometimes, right? We get caught up in our own little story. So Neville says, therefore, let us assume the feeling, I am Christ, until our conscious claim becomes our subconscious assumption, that we all with open face, beholding as in a glass or a mirror, the glory of the Lord, are changed into the same image from glory to glory. Let God awake and his enemies be destroyed. There's no greater prayer for man. So I really like this one part where he says, we all with open face beholding. In other words, when you look in the mirror, you want to see the glory of God or the Creator. When you look into the mirror, we talk about mirror work a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That's got to be the greatest thing, is that when you look at yourself in the mirror, you see someone powerful.
Yes.
Someone who's able to create their own reality. You see someone who's loved by you. You see someone who you're proud of.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who you care greatly about when you look
Yeah.
in the mirror. That's my wish for everyone, is that when they look into the mirror, they smile because they're seeing a friend, an old friend that they've been with forever, that they care so much about, that they're so proud of, that they're so happy to be with, and that they see as a powerful person who can create their own reality.
Which that's exactly why you do mirror work, because if you keep doing it over and over and over again, that's exactly where you get to.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the cool part. By the way, I like the little phrase there, from the same image from glory to glory. He's using the word glory in my mind, he's using the word glory to describe all these little starts of creations we have that go on in our minds. And that's a great way to describe that feeling. We talked about the feeling a moment ago, the feeling of being conscious, the feeling of being in that place where you have this nascent idea and it's just starting to take hold, and you follow it and you follow it and you follow it. And that's such a cool feeling. Glory, it's a good word for it. That's exactly what that is.
And from glory to glory, there will be more. Keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an endless process of just one after another after another. It's kind of like being the skier who has an endless series of hills to ski down. It's very cool.
Next book, but we'll save it for next time.
Sounds good. Yeah, actually, well, given how long it often takes us to get through a chapter, we could spend probably the entire show on that one very short book next time. So we'll do that.
We can do it if we try.
I'm sure we can. But it's been great. Thank you very much. Before we go, tell people how to reach Cindy Chavez, the life coach.
They can find me at cindychavez.com, CINDIECHAVEZ.com. I would love to hear from you, and I would love to help you. If you would, if you're in the market for a coach, please give me a shout out. And if you like our show, if you want to give us some ideas, say hello, whatever it is, just reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
We do love hearing from our listeners. Thank you all for our loyal listeners and to our new listeners as well. We will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.